The morning sun was warm but not yet harsh when the expectant woman decided to step out with her husband for a quiet meal. She was in the later months of her pregnancy, her steps slower, her body heavy, and her energy fading quickly in the heat. More than anything, she wanted to sit down, enjoy some food, and spend time in a comfortable place away from the noise of home. Her husband, always caring, had promised her that the restaurant they were visiting was one of the best in town. Clean, cool, and with excellent service. As they drove through the streets, she leaned her head against the window, rubbing her belly softly. The thought of sitting at a nice table, sipping cold water, and resting her tired feet felt like heaven. She imagined herself sinking into a chair inside, away from the blazing sun, the air conditioning soothing her skin. Little did she know the experience ahead would test not only her patience, but also reveal truths about people that she would never forget. When they reached the restaurant, it was already bustling with guests. Cars lined the entrance and a group of people waited near the front door. The woman felt a wave of exhaustion sweep over her, but her husband reassured her with a smile. "Don't worry. I know the staff here. You'll be seated soon." The couple walked toward the entrance. The husband stepped aside to park the car, asking her to wait by the door. She nodded, trusting that she would be welcomed in as soon as he returned. But the moment she approached the front desk, her experience shifted sharply. A young hostess stood there, scrolling through her tablet with an air of impatience. She glanced up, her eyes scanning the woman quickly before darting back down. There was no smile, no warm greeting. The hostess barely acknowledged her presence, as though she were just another number in line. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, her voice tired but polite. "Could I please have a table? My husband will join me in a moment." She placed a hand on her belly, almost instinctively, as though it would explain why she needed to be seated soon. The hostess sighed, tapping at the screen. "You'll need to wait outside." "We're busy." The words were flat, sharp, and dismissive. The woman blinked in surprise. She looked past the hostess into the restaurant. Several tables were empty, waiting to be cleared, while others were half full. Surely there was space for her to sit, at least inside where it was cooler. She tried again, her voice a little firmer. "I don't mind waiting, but is it possible to wait inside? It's very hot outside." The hostess didn't even look up this time. "No. Please wait outside until we call you." Her tone carried no kindness, no sympathy, no sign that she even noticed the swelling belly in front of her. The woman's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to explain how difficult it was to stand in the heat, but something in the hostess's dismissive eyes stopped her. Instead, she quietly turned and stepped aside, moving back toward the entrance where the sun blazed on the pavement. Minutes ticked by. Her husband was still parking the car, unaware of what had just happened. Sweat formed on her forehead, and she shifted uncomfortably from one foot to another. People passing by noticed her condition. A man muttered under his breath, "She should be inside." A mother shook her head, whispering to her daughter, "That poor woman is pregnant. Why are they making her stand there?" The expectant woman felt her cheeks burn, not only from the heat but also from humiliation. She was used to strangers offering seats on buses or holding doors open for her during her pregnancy. But here, at a place her husband trusted, she was being treated with coldness and disregard. Her hand pressed against her back as she tried to relieve the ache. She thought of sitting at home instead, where she could lie down comfortably. Yet she stayed, telling herself it was just a mistake that the staff would realize soon enough. She didn't want to create trouble. When her husband finally walked back from the parking lot, he smiled at her, until he noticed her flushed face and the beads of sweat trickling down her temple. Concern filled his eyes immediately. "Why are you still outside? Didn't they seat you?" She shook her head quietly, her lips pressed tightly together. Before she could explain, the hostess appeared again, ushering in another couple who had arrived later than she had. The couple smiled as they were welcomed inside, no questions asked. The husband's face darkened as he watched, realization dawning that his wife had been ignored. The woman lowered her eyes, embarrassed, but inside she felt a spark of anger begin to build. She hadn't asked for special treatment, only fairness, only kindness. Yet she had been pushed aside, treated as though she didn't matter, and that was only the beginning. The minutes outside the restaurant stretched painfully. The expectant woman shifted her weight from one leg to the other, her swollen feet aching against the hot pavement. The sun glared down mercilessly, and though she tried to shield herself with her scarf, the heat pressed against her skin like a heavy blanket. She rubbed her belly gently, whispering to her unborn child as if to comfort both herself and the little life inside her. Her husband stood by her now, equally puzzled and angry at what he had seen. He leaned toward the hostess's stand. "My wife has been waiting. Can't she at least sit inside until our table is ready?" The hostess didn't look up from her tablet. "Sir, I already told her. Everyone has to wait outside. No exceptions." Her tone was clipped, final, and dripping with irritation. The husband's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice controlled. "She's pregnant. Look at her. She can't be standing here in this heat." This time the hostess did glance up, but instead of sympathy, her eyes rolled slightly, as though she was bored by the complaint. "Sir, we're following procedure. Please wait outside like everyone else. Your turn will come." The husband clenched his fist but bit back his words. He didn't want to embarrass his wife in front of the growing crowd. He walked back to her side, his face stormy with quiet anger. She touched his arm gently, shaking her head. "Let it go. We'll wait." And so they waited. Every few minutes the door opened and new guests were greeted with bright smiles and polite voices. The hostess's behavior changed like a mask. Families walked in, couples strolled past, and groups of friends were seated almost immediately. The pregnant woman and her husband, however, remained outside as though invisible. The heat was unbearable. Sweat gathered on her forehead and slid down her cheeks. Her breathing grew heavier and she fanned herself with her hand. A woman in line behind them leaned forward and whispered to the hostess, "She's pregnant. Can't you just let her sit inside for a while?" The hostess's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Ma'am, we have rules. Please don't interfere." The woman behind shook her head in disbelief, muttering under her breath, "Heartless." The pregnant woman heard the word, but she stayed quiet. She hated scenes, hated drawing attention. But now attention was finding her whether she liked it or not. Strangers were beginning to stare, their eyes filled with pity. Children pointed, asking their parents why the auntie with the big tummy wasn't allowed inside. The humiliation stung deeper than the heat. Her husband tried again. "We've been waiting nearly 40 minutes, he said firmly. "Others came after us and they've been seated. What's going on?" The hostess didn't even hide her annoyance now. She shrugged. Maybe they had reservations. Maybe the manager approved them. "Not my problem. You'll have to wait until I call you." Her coldness sliced through the couple like a knife. The husband's lips parted as if to unleash his anger, but his wife squeezed his hand, whispering, "Please don't. I can handle this." But the truth was, she couldn't. Her body was tiring quickly. Her legs ached, her back burned, and the heat made her dizzy. She longed for even a plastic chair in the shade, anything to ease the weight pressing on her. The crowd around them noticed her suffering. Some shook their heads in disgust at the hostess. Others began whispering about how unfair it was. Yet no one dared confront the staff directly. People were always hesitant to challenge authority in public, even when it was clearly wrong. As time dragged on, the humiliation deepened. She saw guests leaving happily, their bellies full while she hadn't even been allowed a seat. The thought echoed in her head again and again. All I asked for was a little kindness. Why is that too much? Her husband grew quieter, his anger boiling beneath the surface. He paced beside her, glancing repeatedly at the glass doors where the hostess stood comfortably in the shade. His hands twitched, itching to reveal who he really was, to put an end to this cruelty, but he waited, for now. The pregnant woman forced a faint smile at him. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "I'll be fine," but she wasn't fine. The longer she stood, the weaker she felt. The sun dipped lower, but the heat still clung to the air. Hours had passed. Her lips were dry, her throat parched, and her strength fading. Guests who had arrived long after her were now finishing their meals inside. Yet still, the hostess pretended not to notice her. The long wait had turned into a silent battle, a test of patience, of dignity, of how much one woman could endure under the weight of cruelty. And though she held her head high, deep down she knew something had to give. This couldn't continue forever. The minutes had already stretched into what felt like forever, and the sun showed no mercy. The pregnant woman tried her best to stay strong, but her body was sending signals she could no longer ignore. Her legs trembled slightly as she shifted from one foot to the other, searching for relief from the ache in her swollen feet. The heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, and every breath she took felt warmer than the last. She pulled her scarf tighter over her head, hoping it would shield her from the sun, but it was useless. Sweat beaded on her forehead, sliding down the sides of her face, soaking into her dress. She dabbed at her skin with a tissue, but it became damp almost instantly. Her back hurt, her ankles throbbed, and her mouth was dry from thirst. Around her, people began to notice. A young man waiting nearby frowned and whispered to his friend, "She's pregnant. Why is she standing out here?" The friend shrugged helplessly, glancing at the glass doors where the hostess stood comfortably inside. A middle-aged woman muttered softly, loud enough for others to hear, "Shameful. She should be seated first. Anyone with eyes can see she needs help." The whispers spread, but the hostess remained unmoved. She tapped on her tablet, adjusted her hair, and occasionally called out names with fake cheerfulness, welcoming other guests inside while ignoring the couple who had been waiting the longest. The pregnant woman pressed her palm against her lower back, trying to ease the strain. Her husband, restless and angry, hovered protectively beside her. He offered to go inside again, but she shook her head. She didn't want a scene. "It's fine," she whispered, though her voice cracked with weakness. "We'll wait a little longer." But her body told a different story. She leaned against the wall for support, her knees wobbling slightly. Her breaths grew shallower, and she had to close her eyes for a moment to steady herself. A child tugged on his mother's arm and pointed, "Mama, why is the auntie standing outside? She looks sick." The mother pulled him close, whispering, "Because some people forget how to be kind." The husband couldn't take it anymore. He stormed back to the hostess, his voice low but firm. "My wife has been waiting for more than an hour. She's pregnant. She needs to sit down now." The hostess glanced up with irritation, as though she had been interrupted from something important. Her tone was dismissive. "Sir, I told you already. We're following procedure. You'll be called when it's your turn." His fist clenched at his sides, but his wife's weak voice stopped him. "Please," she called softly, "come back. Don't argue." Reluctantly, he obeyed, returning to her side. But the fury in his eyes had only deepened. The crowd was no longer silent. People were shaking their heads, some openly glaring at the hostess. A man in line muttered, "If that was my wife, I'd shut the place down." Another woman whispered, "It's like she's enjoying this. Look at her face." The pregnant woman felt their sympathy, but it didn't ease her suffering. She pressed her hand against her belly, whispering to the child inside, "Just hold on a little longer. Mama's trying." Her cheeks were flushed red from the heat. She swayed slightly on her feet, forcing herself to stay upright. Every time the restaurant doors opened and a cool blast of air escaped, it felt like a cruel reminder of what she was being denied. Her husband placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Enough," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't watch you like this any longer." She gave him a faint smile, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It's okay," she lied again. But her trembling hands betrayed her. The signs of her struggle were clear to everyone now. Everyone except the hostess, who turned her head away, pretending not to see. But she couldn't pretend for long. The crowd's murmurs were growing louder, the whispers turning into voices of disapproval. A storm was building, not just in the heat of the day, but in the hearts of everyone watching, and soon, the humiliation and cruelty would reach a point where something or someone would finally break. The sun was sinking lower, but the heat still clung to the air like a heavy weight. The pregnant woman stood outside, her strength nearly gone, while her husband paced beside her, torn between protecting her dignity and unleashing his growing anger. The crowd around them had started to murmur more openly, and the whispers of disapproval now carried sharp edges. Everyone could see what was happening, but the one person who needed to act, the hostess, seemed determined to ignore it. Inside the glass doors, the hostess adjusted her hair, glancing at the couple every now and then with an expression that wasn't just indifferent, but dismissive. It was as though she saw them not as people in need, but as an inconvenience. When the husband approached her again, his voice low and controlled, she cut him off before he could even finish speaking. "I already told you, sir," she said, her tone sharp. "You'll have to wait your turn. We don't give special treatment." The words hit like a slap. Special treatment? His wife wasn't asking for luxury. She wasn't asking to be seated at the best table or to be served ahead of others. She only wanted to sit inside for a moment to escape the heat, to rest her tired body. Calling that special treatment turned her basic need into something undeserved. The husband's jaw tightened. "She is pregnant," he said slowly, trying to keep his temper in check. "This isn't about special treatment. It's about humanity." The hostess raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Sir, I can't make exceptions. If you can't wait, you're welcome to leave." The words were like fuel on fire. The crowd behind them gasped softly, shocked at the blunt cruelty. A woman in line whispered angrily, "How can she talk like that? Doesn't she have any heart?" The pregnant woman lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She hated being the center of attention, hated the pitying stares, but even worse was the sting of the hostess's coldness. She had always believed that people, especially in service jobs, carried at least a spark of empathy. But here she stood, treated as though her pain meant nothing. Her husband wanted to shout, to reveal the truth then and there, that the restaurant wasn't just any restaurant, that it was his. But he looked at his wife, saw the shame in her eyes, and held himself back. For now, the hostess continued her little performance of politeness for other guests. When a wealthy-looking couple arrived, her voice brightened suddenly. "Welcome. Right this way, please," she said, her smile wide and fake. They were seated instantly, despite arriving long after the expectant woman. The pregnant woman watched this scene unfold, her heart sinking further. She whispered to her husband, "Do you see? It's not about rules. She's choosing who matters and who doesn't." Her husband nodded grimly. "I see, and she has no idea who she's talking to." More guests passed by, and each time the hostess's charm returned for them, while her coldness remained locked on the couple outside. It was no longer just neglect, it was deliberate disrespect, a display of superiority, as if she wanted to remind them of their place. The crowd around was no longer whispering but openly talking. Some muttered about walking away, others about speaking to the manager. The air buzzed with anger, yet the hostess pretended not to hear. Her chin tilted high with pride. The pregnant woman's body ached. Her head spun and she held onto her husband's arm for support. "I don't know how much longer I can stand," she admitted softly, her voice weak. Her husband's heart clenched at her words. Enough was enough. He looked at her, then at the hostess, then back at the growing crowd. He had stayed silent to avoid a scene, but the scene had already been created, and not by him. The disrespect had gone too far. The stage was set. The hostess had humiliated his wife in front of strangers, dismissing her pain, ignoring her struggle, and displaying cruelty like it was part of her uniform. What she didn't know was that her every word, her every action was digging a grave for her own position, because the man standing beside the exhausted, humiliated woman wasn't just a husband. He was the owner, and soon her arrogance would meet a truth she could never have imagined. The heat had drained almost all of her strength. The pregnant woman leaned heavily against her husband's arm, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead, her lips dry from thirst. She had been standing for far too long, and though she tried to remain composed, her body betrayed her. Her hand pressed against her belly as if to shield her child from the harshness of the world outside that restaurant door. Her husband watched silently, his heart breaking. For the past hour he had fought to keep his anger in check, hoping that patience would win out. He had respected his wife's wishes not to create a scene, but now, as he looked at her frail form, struggling against the weight of heat and humiliation, something inside him snapped. He stepped forward, his voice sharper than before. "Enough," he said, his words carrying a firmness that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Everyone's attention shifted instantly. The hostess, still perched behind her podium, looked up with irritation, clearly annoyed that he was once again challenging her authority. "I told you already." "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with annoyance, "we have rules. Your wife has to wait outside like everyone else. I don't care if she's tired. If you don't like it, you can leave." The crowd gasped audibly this time. The cruelty in her words was undeniable. Strangers who had been whispering quietly before now looked openly disgusted. One man muttered, "Unbelievable." Another woman shook her head, whispering, "Does she not see the woman is about to faint?" The pregnant woman tried to tug at her husband's hand gently, pleading softly, "Please don't fight. Let's just go somewhere else." Her voice was weak, her pride shattered. She didn't want to stand in the middle of an audience reduced to pity and whispers. But her husband's eyes had hardened. He wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. He straightened his shoulders, his voice calm but filled with power. "You've made my wife stand in the sun for nearly 2 hours. You've seated people who came after her. You've humiliated her in front of everyone here." He paused, his gaze sharp on the hostess. "And now you've crossed a line you cannot come back from." The hostess rolled her eyes, dismissing him once more. "Sir, stop making a scene. I don't make the rules. I follow them. If you have a problem, you can take it up with the owner of this restaurant. I only answer to him." Silence fell. The crowd leaned forward, sensing that something was about to break. The hostess smirked slightly, believing she had won, that her authority could not be challenged. The husband's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of irony. He took a slow step closer, his voice calm but echoing with truth. "You're looking at him." The words struck like thunder. The hostess froze, her face draining of color. Her smug expression shattered instantly as the weight of what he said sank in. The crowd erupted in murmurs, people gasping, others whispering frantically, "He's the owner? Did you hear that? He owns this place." The hostess stammered, her confidence crumbling. You're lying. That's not possible." He pulled out his wallet, calmly showing his ID card that bore the restaurant's name and his own. "My name is on every license, every paycheck, every piece of paperwork this restaurant runs on. You've been disrespecting not just my wife, but the very person who signs for this place to exist." The woman's legs nearly buckled. Her arrogance had vanished in an instant, replaced with shock and fear. She tried to speak, but no words came. The crowd, once silent observers, now broke into whispers of justice. Some even clapped softly, approving of the truth revealed. The pregnant woman, still weak from the heat, looked at her husband in awe. She had known he would eventually step in, but seeing him reveal his authority in such a calm, commanding way filled her with both relief and pride. The husband turned his gaze back to the hostess. His voice was no longer loud but quiet and cutting. "Hospitality is about kindness, respect, humanity. You had a chance to show all of that to a woman carrying life inside her, and instead you chose cruelty." He took a step closer, lowering his tone so that it struck harder. "And you did it right under the eyes of the man who owns everything here." The hostess's hands shook. Her lips trembled. She tried to mumble an apology, but her voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's stares and the authority of the man before her. The husband turned to his wife, his tone softening instantly. "Come inside. You've waited long enough." He guided her gently through the doors, the crowd parting in silence, their eyes following the couple with a mixture of respect and admiration. For the first time that day, the pregnant woman stepped into the cool air of the restaurant. Relief washed over her body as she sank into a chair, but even more comforting was the knowledge that she was no longer invisible. Her dignity had been restored and justice had begun to take shape. But for the hostess, this was only the beginning of her reckoning. The moment the husband spoke those words, "You're looking at him," it was as if the entire restaurant shifted. A hush fell over the place, heavier than the heat outside. Every eye turned toward him, every ear straining to catch what would happen next. The hostess stood frozen behind her podium, her mouth slightly open, her face pale. For a second, she looked like she was waiting for someone to tell her it was a joke. But the quiet murmur of the crowd, the way the staff inside peeked nervously from behind counters, and the calm confidence of the man in front of her made it clear. This was no bluff. The husband's words spread like fire. "He's the owner," people whispered from one to another. "That's his wife they left in the sun." Customers waiting in line shook their heads, disgusted. Some pulled out their phones, already recording the scene, knowing they were witnessing a story that would be told long after the day ended. Inside, the staff scrambled. A waiter rushed out of the kitchen, his eyes wide. Sir, we didn't know you were here," he stammered, bowing slightly. The manager, who had been in the back, hurried forward, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. His face drained when he saw who stood there. "Sir," the manager said carefully, his voice trembling, "we had no idea you were coming today." If we had known, the husband cut him off with a look. He wasn't interested in excuses. His eyes turned back to the hostess, who now clutched her tablet as if it could protect her. "You treated my wife," he said slowly, "as if she were nothing. You ignored her pain. You dismissed her dignity, and you did it with arrogance in front of strangers who showed her more compassion than you did." The hostess's lips parted. I was just following procedure," she whispered, but even she didn't believe her own words. The husband's voice grew sharper. "Procedure does not strip you of humanity. Procedure does not allow you to humiliate a pregnant woman in the blazing sun. You didn't follow rules, you chose cruelty. That was your decision." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several nodded, muttering, "That's true." A woman in line called out, "We all saw it." She refused again and again. The hostess shrank under the weight of so many eyes. Her earlier confidence had crumbled into fear. She looked toward the manager for help, but his face only deepened her dread. He looked ashamed, and his silence told her she was alone. Meanwhile, the pregnant woman, now seated inside with cool air finally easing her suffering, watched the scene quietly. Her cheeks were still pale, her body weak, but her eyes held strength. She had endured hours of heat and humiliation, and now she was watching the truth unfold before everyone. The husband stepped closer to the hostess, his voice calm but carrying authority that could not be challenged. "You said I should take it up with the owner." He leaned slightly forward. "Here I am. What do you have to say now?" Her throat worked, but no words came out. She opened her mouth once, twice, but the silence stretched until it became more painful than any excuse. Finally, she muttered, "I'm sorry." The word was so quiet that half the crowd didn't even hear it. The husband frowned. "Speak louder. Apologize to my wife, not to me. She is the one you disrespected." The hostess's voice cracked as she turned toward the pregnant woman. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean—" But the woman raised her hand gently, stopping her. "Don't apologize because you're caught. Apologize because you understand." Her voice was weak but steady, each word striking with quiet power. The hostess lowered her eyes, tears stinging. Her arrogance shattered. The truth had unfolded for everyone to see. The mighty hostess, who had once rolled her eyes and dismissed a woman in need, now stood small and ashamed before the very people she had looked down upon. And in that moment, the husband knew the lesson wasn't just for her. It was for everyone watching, because kindness is never optional. And respect once denied always returns to demand its place. The restaurant had gone silent except for the low hum of whispers spreading like wildfire. Everyone's eyes were locked on the scene at the front entrance. The once confident hostess now stood pale and trembling, her polished smile gone, her pride stripped away. The husband, tall and steady, faced her with a calmness that was more frightening than if he had shouted. His presence alone carried the weight of truth, and everyone could feel it. The manager stood awkwardly to the side, his face damp with nervous sweat. He glanced at the hostess as if wishing she would disappear, but his own fear of the owner's anger kept him frozen in place. The waiters and busboys peeked from behind the counter, whispering to each other, their eyes wide. The husband's voice was low but firm. "You humiliated my wife for hours. You dismissed her pain when you could have shown kindness. You treated her worse than a number on your list." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And you did it without shame in front of everyone." The hostess swallowed hard, her hands gripping the tablet so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Sir, I was wrong," she stammered. "I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," he cut in sharply. "You looked at my wife's condition and chose to roll your eyes. You saw her suffering and chose to ignore it. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice," the crowd murmured in agreement. A woman near the door spoke loudly. "We all saw it. She didn't care at all." A man added, "If this is how staff treat people, no wonder customers lose trust." The hostess's face flushed red. She glanced around desperately, hoping for someone to defend her, but the crowd's eyes were hard, filled with judgment. Even the manager refused to meet her gaze. The husband took a step closer, his voice lowering but his words sharp as glass. "This restaurant was built on one principle: respect. Respect for customers, respect for workers, respect for human dignity. Without respect, there is no hospitality. You forgot that today. Worse, you spat on it." The hostess's lips trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, sir, give me one more chance." The husband shook his head slowly. "You had many chances. Every minute my wife stood outside was another chance. You ignored them all. The silence stretched heavy. Then the husband spoke words that cut like a knife. "You no longer work here." The hostess's mouth fell open. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some clapped softly, others nodded with satisfaction. A few even whispered, "Justice." The hostess tried one last time, her voice cracking. "Please, I need this job." But the husband's gaze was unflinching. "Jobs can be replaced. Humanity cannot. Leave now." The manager finally stepped forward, his voice timid. "You heard him. Hand over your badge." With shaking hands, the hostess removed her badge and placed it on the podium. Her tears fell freely now, streaking down the face that had once looked smug with authority. She turned quickly, hurrying out the door as the crowd watched in silence. Some pitied her, others felt she had received exactly what she deserved. The husband turned back to the guests. His voice softened. "I apologize to all of you who had to witness this. This is not the spirit of this restaurant. Every person who enters these doors deserves respect. Today you saw what happens when someone forgets that." The crowd clapped. Not loudly, but firmly, as though in agreement with his words. Then he turned to his wife, seated now at a table inside, finally in the comfort she had been denied for hours. He walked over, kneeling gently beside her. "It's over," he whispered. "You don't have to stand anymore. You don't have to suffer anymore." She looked at him, her eyes soft with both pride and relief. "You didn't raise your voice," she said quietly. "You didn't humiliate her back. You just showed her the truth," he smiled faintly. "Sometimes the truth is enough." Around them, the staff moved quickly to serve water, to bring food, to treat her with the care she should have received from the beginning. The other customers looked on with respect, their earlier discomfort now replaced with admiration. The confrontation had ended, but its impact lingered in every corner of the restaurant. A lesson had been delivered not only to the hostess but to everyone watching. Power means nothing without compassion, and arrogance always falls when faced with truth. The restaurant was quieter now. The storm had passed, but its echoes still lingered in every corner. Customers whispered softly to one another, replaying the scene they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads in disbelief at the hostess's arrogance. Others nodded with respect for the calm way the truth had unfolded. The pregnant woman sat at a table near the window, a tall glass of cold water in her hand. She took slow sips, feeling her body finally relax after hours in the heat. Her cheeks, once pale and damp with sweat, were regaining color. Her husband sat across from her, his eyes still filled with concern. He hadn't touched his own glass. His attention remained fixed on her, making sure she was all right. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with unspoken gratitude, pride, and relief. She looked at him and thought of how he had stood tall when she couldn't. He looked at her and thought of how she had endured more pain and humiliation than anyone should, yet still carried herself with grace. The staff moved quickly around them, their every action filled with nervous energy. Plates were brought out faster than ever, chairs wiped twice over, drinks refilled before they were even empty. The waiters bowed their heads each time they approached, their voices humble, their words soft. The message was clear. They wanted to make up for what had happened, to prove that the spirit of the restaurant wasn't defined by one person's cruelty. The other guests, too, stole glances at the couple. Some smiled warmly, offering nods of quiet support. A few even walked over briefly, whispering words like, "You handled that with such dignity," or "Your wife deserves all the respect in the world." Each comment carried the weight of truth. The hostess, however, was gone. She had left the building with tears on her cheeks and shame heavy on her shoulders, and though her absence left the air lighter, the lesson of her actions remained heavy in everyone's minds. The husband finally broke the silence, his voice soft but steady. "You see, love," he said, reaching across the table to hold his wife's hand. "Titles mean nothing if they're not used to protect others. Owning this place doesn't matter to me if the people inside forget their humanity." His wife squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shimmering. "You didn't shout at her. You didn't humiliate her back. You showed her the truth in front of everyone. That's more powerful than anger." He smiled faintly. "Anger burns fast, but truth leaves a mark." She leaned back, finally allowing herself to rest, the cool air soothing her body. She thought of the hours outside, of the heat, the whispers, the humiliation. But now, as she sat in comfort with her husband across from her, she realized something important. Her suffering had not been in vain, because it had revealed something deeper. The difference between arrogance and compassion, between pride and humility, between cruelty and kindness. As the restaurant returned to its rhythm, people carried the story with them. Customers would tell it later at dinner tables and workplaces, how a hostess disrespected a pregnant woman, unaware that her husband was the owner, and how the truth had unfolded like a lesson for all. It would live on as a reminder that kindness should never depend on appearances, and respect should never be optional. When the couple finally rose to leave, the staff followed them to the door, thanking them again and again. The guests clapped softly, a gesture of respect more than celebration. The pregnant woman stepped into the evening air, cooler now, the sun no longer blazing. She breathed deeply, her body lighter, her dignity restored. Her husband walked beside her, steady and protective. He didn't boast about what had happened. He didn't gloat. He simply slipped his arm around her and whispered, "No one will ever make you feel invisible again." She smiled through her tiredness, leaning her head gently against his shoulder. "I don't need the world to see me," she murmured. "As long as you do." And with that they walked away, not just from the restaurant, but from a chapter that had taught everyone watching an unforgettable truth. Never underestimate the quiet strength of the disrespected. Never forget that every person deserves dignity. And above all, never mistreat someone because you never know who they truly are.